Hallie, and we're starting tonight breaking down what comes next after that historic move by the January 6th committee in its very last public meeting that we know of. The panel is laying out 4 criminal charges for former President Trump. The first time ever that Congress has recommended charges to the Justice Department against a former president. You're about to see the charges here: obstructing an official proceeding, 2 conspiracy counts, and inciting an insurrection. So this last one, this is the biggie, right? Because if Mr. Trump were to be indicted and then convicted of that, it's possible he wouldn't be able to hold public office again, ever, something he's trying to do in 2024. But that leads us to our first big question, right? We've said this was a hypothetical, so will the Justice Department actually act on these referrals? Because they're not commenting right now. And remember, everything that happened today is symbolic. It doesn't actually carry any legal weight. The Attorney General doesn't have to do anything with these recommendations. The special counsel doesn't have to do anything with these recommendations for Mr. Trump or for John Eastman, the architect, if you will, of this whole conspiracy built on lies to plot to overturn the 2020 election. But the committee is clear. They think the DOJ should take their advice and that Mr. Trump needs to be charged.
He is unfit for any office.
Ours is not a system of justice where foot soldiers go to jail and the masterminds and ringleaders get a free pass.
If we are to survive as a nation of laws and democracy, this can never happen again.
So what is next, then, for Mr. Trump? Sources that I'm talking with close to the former president say, listen, the cake is kind of baked on this, right? People know what they think about the January 6th Select Committee, and this is probably not going to be a game changer for his campaign. They think. That said, some 2/3 of Americans say they are somewhat likely, at least, to read this January 6th report. Of course, the big thing we're waiting on now is evidence, right? The DOJ wants to see that. We may see more of it on Wednesday with a new executive summary released in just the last couple of hours, laying out some intriguing threads that they didn't pull on about what could come next. We'll get more on the former president live from Mar-a-Lago with Vaughn Hilliard and get the DOJ view with Ken Delanian in a second. But I want to start with our Hallie Vitale on Capitol Hill, who's been all over the story, scoops in the last 24 hours. Hallie, it is really clear here, right, what the panel wants to do. They want to put the blame squarely on former President Trump for a violent insurrection that saw the Capitol invaded and overrun here, right? Setting aside the legal teeth that these criminal referrals have, this is symbolic. This is historic. This is unprecedented. What you're not seeing a lot of in this report is, like, for example, the security and intelligence failings leading up to January 6th. But that's intentional. I spoke with a committee member today who said, yeah, the focus really needed to be on Donald Trump.
Yeah, look, they were very aware that they were creating a narrative here based on the investigating that they've already done, gathering evidence. But we saw it in every single hearing over the course of this summer into the early fall. The fact that in every hearing, regardless of if it was focused on pressure inside the DOJ, pressure on former Vice President Mike Pence, what was happening at the state level, every single hearing drove back to former President Donald Trump, what he was being told by members of his inner circle, many times in their own words, because almost all of them talked to the committee, and then what he did anyway, which was continue to try to subvert and overturn the results of the U.S. election. That's something that their referrals today ultimately are the culmination are. The fact, though, to me, that as they lay out 4 different referrals for Trump, 2 of them for Eastman, the one that they leave alone, it's not obstruction and it's not conspiracy, it's the assisting and doing an insurrection that they level solely at former President Trump's feet. That is a referral for him and him alone, and that's striking after these 18 months of investigating.
Let's talk about, then, some of these unpulled threads that the committee is leaving dangling here. One of them seemed to do with, let's say, for example, campaign finance violations, with this implication that some of the fundraising that the former president did after January 6th was based on false claims. I asked Congressman Jamie Raskin, who's on the panel, who chaired the referral subcommittee on this, is there more to come? Watch. Are you done? Meaning, are the referrals that you've made the referrals you're going to make, and that's that?
Yeah, well, we've made referrals in cases where we have found abundant or overwhelming evidence of culpability and major offenses committed against the U.S. as part of this whole scheme. We repose our faith and our confidence at this point in the executive branch of government, in the Department of Justice, to pursue all of those leads.
So it sounds like they're pretty much done, Hallie. That said, there is this open question of potential witness tampering, right, that was brought up during today's meeting. The suggestion that at least one of the witnesses was told, perhaps, maybe you don't need to remember this quite so clearly. Maybe there's a really cushy job in it for you if you don't, et cetera. We may see more about that on Wednesday when some of these transcripts come out.
Yeah, and this is the thing that you and I were texting about in pretty much real time, which is the idea of, like, are these the only referrals that we're going to see? Especially because in some of these referrals, they're putting them to Donald Trump, John Eastman, and others. Those two words are doing a lot and saying a lot without giving us much information. And I asked Raskin about if we would have an answer to who those others might be in reading the actual report on Wednesday. And he said that it would give us a better idea, but also that the referrals that they put forward today are the ones that they feel they have on such solid ground, they have such solid evidence that those are the ones that they're going to refer to DOJ. But you're right. They've been dropping breadcrumbs about possible election finance problems over the course of the last few months. There's also questions about if they're going to be doing any witness tampering or we're going to get any more information on that. And then, of course, there's a larger question, too, of, like, what do the transcripts say? I'm very interested, perhaps unsurprisingly, as someone who has lived and breathed this story for a year, of what these transcripts read like and what the committee was told that maybe they didn't think fit their narrative or cleanly was put into a hearing. We're going to learn a lot from that. Now, prosecutors that we've talked to, Chuck Rosenberg included, have said that that's not the way that DOJ likes to operate for myriad number of reasons. They don't like to have everything out in the open, but this committee has promised transparency in its final report. And frankly, as journalists, as people who want the public to have as much insight into these processes as possible, this is a good thing for us.
Real quick, Hallie, you know, there is an expiration date on this committee. It is roughly the same as a carton of eggs right about now, right? 2 weeks, the end of the year. And some of the Republicans that they've referred over to the House Ethics Committee, right? Not criminal charges for these 4 House Republicans, but an ethics referral probably isn't going to go anywhere, right? A new Congress takes over in January and Republicans will control the House. Hard to see how those Republicans would then be subject to a House ethics investigation by their own party here. Some of them are responding tonight,
Some of them are responding. In both cases, for both Scott Perry and Jim Jordan, they are lashing out at the committee as being partisan in fashion. But look, this is an instance where the committee beat the clock on all the things that needed to beat the clock on, except for probably this one, because the House Ethics Committee would have to push this, vote to push it into the next Congress, and it's a 50-50 split, Democrats and Republicans. Unlikely they're going to do that, which means these referrals pretty much go nowhere.
Hallie Vitale, excellent reporting. Thank you very much for bringing it to us tonight to start off the show. Let me bring in Ken Delaney in here because, Ken, there were some new nuggets of information today, including, we saw for the first time, Hope Hicks, longtime sort of right-hand woman for Donald Trump, former White House communications director. She testified that Mr. Trump told her the only thing matters is winning. Listen.
I was becoming increasingly concerned that we were damaging his legacy. He said something along the lines of, you know, nobody will care about my legacy if I lose.
And perhaps more importantly, Ken, she also testified that the former president resisted suggestions to call for peace prior to January 6th. The DOJ wants new information like that, right? It's not these referrals they're looking for. They care about the actual evidence. But let's say they do listen to the committee. Let's say that down the road, the DOJ comes out and says, OK, we're actually going to pick up X, Y, and Z of these referrals. The insurrection charge is important, as we laid out here at the top of the show, because it comes out of the Civil War. It means that somebody in the 14th Amendment, if somebody is convicted of insurrection or has been an insurrectionist, they cannot run for federal office. There is some question about whether that could actually bar Mr. Trump from running again. Help us understand it. Does it matter here? Is that the part with teeth or not?
Well, it may or may not matter. It's an important question, I think, that you're raising. The issue with that 14th Amendment provision is there's no statute in the law that executes it. And so there's a real question if Donald Trump is convicted of insurrection, and we're way down the track there.
Yeah, if,
would that be enforceable? Would that provision of the Constitution apply to that conviction? And I'm sure, of course, there will be a legal fight about that. But more importantly, the referral on insurrection was interesting to me because, you know, the DOJ has not brought a charge of insurrection in any of the Capitol riot cases, including in the trial that's underway now against the Proud Boys, including the Oath Keepers. The most serious charge they've brought is a related one, seditious conspiracy. And there's been a debate in legal circles about which one would better apply to Trump. They're very similar charges, but seditious conspiracy requires a conspiracy, whereas insurrection just requires that they prove that Trump aided and abetted and assisted an insurrection, although they would have to prove that he intended for the violence to happen at the Capitol. But there must be some kind of problem with that statute. Chuck Rosenberg and I were trying to figure out what it might be, because the DOJ has declined to bring it in any of the Capitol riot cases. But leaving that aside, your point is really well taken about it's about the evidence. So Hope Hicks, for example, if she hasn't been before the criminal grand jury investigating January 6th, at some point she will be, because that kind of evidence that you just saw there with her talking about Donald Trump's state of mind is crucial, because in order to make a case against Donald Trump, the DOJ is going to have to prove that he had criminal intent, that he knew what he was doing was wrong. He knew the claims of fraud were bogus. And he's got a strong defense against that. He's going to say, oh, I was just listening to my lawyers, Jeffrey Clark and people like that, John Eastman, who were telling me that these claims of fraud were right. And I was disregarding Bill Barr. And it's my prerogative to take whatever legal advice I decide as president is the one I want to listen to. That's a very powerful defense. The DOJ is going to have to overcome that before they decide whether to bring a charge, Hallie.
So, and we're talking about the charge for any potential charges for what happened on January 6th. The DOJ is separately also looking at this Mar-a-Lago documents issue, right? The idea that the former president had in his possession at Mar-a-Lago classified documents that he should not have had. People you're talking with say that's actually the investigation that could wrap up more quickly here.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, some legal experts say that any other government official already would have been charged, given the evidence that we know that's in the public domain. There's some question about exactly what the DOJ has and what it needs to get on the question of did Donald Trump or anyone around him obstruct justice in that case. But really what it seems to me is that Jack Smith, his main job in that Mar-a-Lago case is going to be to decide whether this is the case you bring against the former president. You know, whether, given all the evidence that we have, given that Donald Trump had access to these documents while president, then lost access to them but still kept them, is that enough to charge a former president? And we'll just have to wait and see what he decides, Hallie.
Ken Delaney, thank you so much. Let me bring in Vaughn Hilliard, who is live for us in West Palm Beach at Mar-a-Lago. And Vaughn, within just the last couple of minutes, we've heard now from former President Trump, because as we look more broadly at why this matters, right? He was on a radio show, and we're hearing he was there. I'm trying to pull up the quote here, and I'm going to ask my teleprompter to roll a little bit because I asked him to put it in prompter, just full transparency. He says the people are not going to stand for it anymore, right? That's what he's saying. He and his team have long suggested that this committee's investigation was partisan, was simply part of a kangaroo court, if you will. Tell me what you're hearing from people in his orbit and more widely, because there's this new Quinnipiac poll that shows actually about 2/3 of Americans are at least somewhat likely to want to read this report when it does come out.
Right, and I think that's where, Hallie, two things can be true at once. On one hand, the greater share of the American electorate roundly rejected Trumpism here in these midterm elections after choosing to vote him out of office in the 2020 election. Yet, on the other hand, this also can be true, and that can be that the Republican electorate in the 2022 midterms, in those primaries, chose the Trump-backed candidates widely. And what you see happening right now is Donald Trump trying to rally his troops around him yet again. He announced his 2024 bid, and I was talking to one RNC committee man who has been a longtime figure in this Republican Party. He said, look, this is a badge of honor for Donald Trump to have him being referred to the Department of Justice here. And for those within the Republican Party apparatus, it emboldens them to further strengthen their support around him. And that is where, when you see Donald Trump, the one statement that he put out, besides that radio interview on Truth Social, was a simple line saying Liz Cheney lost her election by 40 percentage points, and obviously referencing back in May when the candidate that he endorsed in the Wyoming primary against her beat her handily. And that is where Donald Trump, in so many ways, is more so justifying his actions around January 6th rather than denying them outright.
Vaughn Hilliard live for us there in West Palm Beach. Vaughn, thank you for being there. Appreciate it. And while the January 6th committee is wrapping up its investigation, you've got 5 members of the Proud Boys today getting ready to stand trial on charges of seditious conspiracy and some other felonies as it relates to what happened up to and on January 6th. These are the men, right? This is a high-profile trial. This is one of the highest-profile trials we've seen. Enrique Tarrio, the group leader. Members Ethan Nordine, Joseph Biggs, Zachary Rell, Dominic Pizzola. Prosecutors say it's this group, the Proud Boys, who planned to rile up the crowd on the 6th and successfully led rioters past police barricades into the Capitol, according to charging documents. We are in jury selection now for this trial. It's expected to last the rest of the week, opening arguments after the new year. So it's looking like either a white Christmas or a bitterly cold one for most of the United States. We are talking dangerously cold temperatures, probably the coldest Christmas in years, according to our climate unit, because of this really powerful winter storm that's going to bring wind and rain and snow for the holiday weekend. Travel is not going to be easy. You might see millions of people ending up in chaos if you're trying to drive or fly to certain locations. AAA says air travel is expected to go up about 14% over the last year, with more than 7 million Americans set to fly somewhere for the holidays. Bill Cairns joins us now. And Bill, it's always cold at the holidays. It is super duper scary cold this year.
And Hallie, I don't know how to handle this forecast because, like, some people are happy, they want the white Christmas, but you want to be able to go outside in it. It's so cold. So this is the beginning of it. So this is our wind chill map for the whole country. We'll watch all these really bad cold temperatures east of the Rockies. It's -19 in Bismarck. Now that's not unheard of. Usually the cold air is up there almost all winter long. But what's different about this is heading all the way down to the Gulf Coast eventually. So we already have wind chill watches and warnings and advisory that go from the Dakotas and Montana, and now they've been extended all the way down to North Texas, and eventually they may even be extended south of that. And yes, it can be dangerous to get stranded outside. Typically, the cold air does not stop you from traveling, though, and getting to your loved ones for the holidays. Winter weather does. So just how cold will it be? Let's fast forward to Friday morning. This will be the coldest morning in Texas, Dallas at 10. And of course, we think what happened a couple of years ago in Texas, where they lost all the power with the winter storm, and people were freezing and pipes were bursting. So we'll watch Texas closely. Hopefully they'll fire up enough power plants and be ready for it this time. New Orleans at 26 will be cold. And then the cold air Saturday morning, Christmas Eve, reaches the East Coast. In the teens from Raleigh to New York, you can deal with that, not that bad. But the temperature of the freezing line could get all the way down here to Orlando. So now let's talk to the thing that could prevent people from getting to their destinations over the Christmas holiday. Already we got 38 million people under winter weather advisories or warnings or watches. We're going to start with this storm, and here's the timing of it through Friday in the plains. This is light snow. This shouldn't even stop the airports. You'll be okay. Minneapolis, Des Moines, you'll do a little bit of shoveling if they're driving, a little bit of snow, but I think you'll get to your destinations. Thursday, that's when this changes. Heavy snow early in the day, Kansas City. Missouri is going to be a mess on Thursday, maybe northern Arkansas. St. Louis, Thursday evening, the heavy snow breaks out. The winds pick up. Could even have blizzard conditions developing in areas of eastern Iowa, southern Wisconsin, and northern Illinois Thursday night. That's when Chicago starts to get into the mix of it. By Friday morning, this is the worst, because this is when they're going to tell people to stay off the roads or you risk getting trapped. We're going to tell people to stay home for probably 24 to 36 hours from southern Wisconsin, northern Illinois, maybe even including the Chicago area, all of northern Indiana. This is going to be a huge windstorm. There's going to be huge waves on Lake Michigan. There's going to be freezing spray on houses. It's going to be, just an extreme weather event is a good way of putting it. And at the same time, heavy rain in southern New England. If you have travel plans in southern New England, especially in the airlines, it is going to be a mess on Friday because of gusty winds and heavy rain. You're not going to have to deal with winter weather, but that's bad enough, especially with the high volume. And if you're wondering about snowfall, it's too early, Hallie, to give exact amounts, but anywhere in purple, you're going to be in what we call heavy snow. That's Chicago, Indianapolis, northwards, and then the blue is where we're going to be shoveling. So, Hallie, this will be probably the most difficult winter travel forecast pre-Christmas in decades.
Bill Cairns, I'm glad you're going to be all over it for us in the week to come. Thank you, friend. Appreciate it. So right as we came on the air tonight, we saw reports that Sam Bankman-Fried has just agreed to his extradition to the United States to face charges related to the collapse of his crypto exchange. This is from the New York Times, quoting one of Bankman-Fried's local lawyers in the Bahamas. And it comes after a chaotic day that had the disgraced former crypto king being shuttled between a Bahamas court and prison. So here's the deal. SBF, as he's known, was expected to agree to extradition this morning. He showed up in court briefly at an appearance that his own lawyer didn't even think he'd be at, and that the judge ended up calling a waste of time. Instead, SBF demanded to see the indictment against him. He was then returned to prison, back to jail. And again, now he's reportedly agreeing to come to the U.S. for extradition, according to the Times. Jake Ward is joining us now. So it's a back and forth, but the bottom line is that it sounds like SBF is going to face the music here in this country for the epic collapse of his crypto kingdom.
That's absolutely right, Hallie. It seems one way or another he is going to wind up in front of the orchestra here in the United States. The question is just how quickly, right? We know, of course, that the Bahamas has this open extradition treaty with the United States. There's no question there. But what has historically been the case is that it takes an incredibly long time to move someone from the Bahamas to the U.S. if they choose to fight that extradition. That's why all eyes were on this Bahamian courtroom this morning to see whether or not he would go ahead as expected and simply turn himself over voluntarily for extradition. But then he shows up dressed in a suit, and he is visibly shaking, according to the people inside the courtroom, and asks to then see the charging documents, which sets off wild speculation that he's somehow going to begin fighting extradition. As you mentioned, his attorney, according to an NBC producer who was in the room, did not expect him there and was surprised that he would ask to see this charging document. And then we wind up with the New York Times reporting, which now says he went back to the Bahamian jail. He was then brought back into court, or at least communicated with the court, and in that case he now has agreed to extradition. And in the words of a local defense lawyer, he was defying, quote, the strongest possible legal advice. Again, he's facing the music in the United States. We know that's going to happen, but these erratic moves we've seen ever since he was arrested are continuing today, Hallie.
Jake, we talked about the next steps here. What else do we know about what's happening behind the scenes as it relates to SBF and this really sort of dramatic moment here?
Well, it is interesting to try to understand what his motivations are in going back and forth on this process. You know, and part of it might be the conditions of the jail. The Bahamian prison system is not particularly well regarded. The State Department has in the past regarded it as overcrowded, unhygienic, unsanitary conditions. And the reporting is that Sam Bankman-Fried has, in fact, had to see medical personnel while he's been in there. Maybe he's just tired of the jail in the Bahamas and wants to be back in an American facility as quick as he can. It's really not clear. But at this point, we are just smacking our head hour by hour as we watch this thing twist and turn towards extradition, Hallie.
Jake Ward, thank you very much for that. I want to share some breaking news that's happening right as we're coming on the air tonight. The Supreme Court ordering a temporary stay of Title 42, that Trump-era public health policy at the southern border, meaning it's basically pressing pause, right? It's probably not going to expire later this week like it was supposed to. The backstory on this, if you're like, wait a second, Hal, Title 42, what are you talking about? So 19 Republican-led states filed this emergency appeal today. It let the government, this policy, right, Title 42, let the government expel migrants and deny asylum during the pandemic. We're also learning that Governor Greg Abbott is sending more than 400 Texas National Guardsmen to El Paso to help with border security, with officials in those cities, like along the border, bracing for a surge of as many as 5,000 new migrants a day. It's December, right? So it's cold. Temperatures in El Paso are dropping below freezing at night, with some finding a warm place to sleep in the airport while they wait. The mayor of El Paso has already declared a state of emergency, but the impacts of the surge are also being felt further north. New York City's Mayor Eric Adams says they're expecting busloads of people this week, which is just not sustainable. Let me bring in Guad Venegas now. Guad, let me start with this temporary stay, right? Timeline is TBD, based on my understanding, until the court can, the court's got to do something else moving forward. This is a significant moment, though, for this policy that has been under so much controversy and has real-world ramifications. Talk us through it.
Hallie, right. It is temporary. And then as we read the information coming in of this decision, Chief Justice also asked the Biden administration to submit a response by tomorrow at 5 p.m. So this will be developing. Now, the story here at the border is, of course, that everyone was expecting for what would happen if that COVID-era policy would be lifted at the border. Now, Title 42 allows officers at the border to expel migrants that enter the United States easier. It's also harder for migrants to go to the port of entry and request asylum. So essentially, it gives more options that make it easier for officers at the border to keep undocumented migrants out of the country. Now, what's happened with the news of the possible end of Title 42 spreading throughout different parts of Mexico and even Central and South America, more migrants understood that there was a change happening at the U.S.-Mexico border that meant it could be easier for them to enter the United States. Hallie, just this morning, I was across the border in Juarez, Mexico. I spoke to some of the migrants that are right at the border who told me we We don't understand exactly what's going to happen in U.S. policy, but we know that something's going to change on Wednesday. So we're going to wait and try to cross then because we think it's going to be easier. So this is the way that migrants understand these changes at the border. What it means is that any change in policy at the border usually makes more migrants arrive. And this is what authorities here had been preparing for. You talked about what's happened here in El Paso. Local authorities here declaring a state of emergency because of this new surge. I mean, you can see the people behind me. This is an area where people had been sleeping in the streets. This is an area where a lot of the asylum seekers have come to ask for food, for clothing, anything that they can use before they continue their journey. Local authorities here in El Paso have been overwhelmed, and you've seen this in different parts of the border with the influx of asylum seekers coming into the United States. Now, what the local authorities here in El Paso said is that through their federal contacts, they had learned that they were expecting an even larger surge after Title 42 would be lifted, and this is what has a lot of Republican states worried. Yet I should say, Hallie, that here in El Paso, local authorities, when they talk about what's happening at the border, they do focus on the humanitarian effort. They say that they want to focus on helping these asylum seekers. They believe that major immigration reform is needed at the border, and they don't focus so much on the end of Title 42, which is something that these Republican-led states are really focusing on. Here in Texas, the governor keeps talking about this Title 42, wanting the policy to remain in place. So it's two different perspectives, although authorities do agree on the fact that there isn't enough resources for the number of asylum seekers that are arriving. The perspectives are different in the approach that they have been taking, Hallie.
Quad Venegas live for us there along the border with that, Quad. Many moving pieces for you, especially today. Thanks for being with us. A lot of moving pieces also over at Twitter, where we're still waiting to hear from Elon Musk after he posted a poll asking users if he should step down as CEO. A lot of people voted, 17 million of them. The majority of them said, yeah, bye. But while Musk is still running the place, he's making some changes, then taking them back. The latest, that users would not be able to link their other social media accounts, Facebook, Instagram, even Mastodon, because Twitter considered them prohibited. Mastodon is seen as like maybe a new competitor to Twitter. A lot of users didn't like that policy, so Musk reversed it and said he's not going to make any more big changes without asking all of you Twitter users first. Just last week, he posted a different poll asking when he should unsuspend some of the journalists he kicked off Twitter. And after the results came in, he did restore a lot of them. Brandy Zadrozny joins us now. So, Brandy, is this what's up with Twitter now that Musk is going to do, like, rule by poll, if you will? He doesn't have any obligation to follow what people say. What's up with this?
That's what he says that he's going to do this week. And, I think we really do have to, and you're sort of getting at it, that we have to remember there's no reason to believe that Elon Musk is going to do what he says he will do. He has instituted a number of key decisions, right, and then walked them back. Policy changes and then walked them back. He even said, we'll do stupid things at Twitter and then I'll change it. So yes, this is the new sort of world. I know that I've been looking at Twitter nonstop to see if he might choose this successor now. Lots of people, it's trending right now. Has Elon is trending. So everyone's kind of waiting for this, but who knows if he'll do it or what the decision will be.
Yeah, and the question is, like, who would even do it, right? Who could run Twitter day to day if Musk sort of steps back from that role? It seems like he just can't quit the social media platform, especially now that he owns it. But that person's in for kind of a lot, considering, as we talk about a lot here on the show, a relatively small number of people actually use Twitter, right? Like, as far as you look at the percentage of Americans. But those who do, it is often a place where people, politicians, others can sort of make these big announcements in a kind of public space. Private space, but it feels like a public space.
Right. The public square owned by one of the richest men in the world. We don't know, again, who this replacement is going to be. I can't think it's a very attractive job, right? But, it could be somebody from his inner circle. He has dozens right now of advisors that Twitter employees for a while called Elon's goons. And they're sort of following him around, some executives who worked at Tesla or SpaceX or the Boring Company. There's this one guy, Steve Davis, who is a former president of the Boring Company, and he's at Twitter headquarters a lot. People are suggesting maybe him or maybe David Sachs, who worked with Musk at PayPal and is this huge sort of Elon reply guy. But like you said, whoever it is really up for a pretty real and thankless challenge. This is a huge platform. It's overwhelmed by hate speech. It's got a skeleton crew, unclear policies, fleeing advertisers. I certainly wouldn't want the job.
Oh, Brandy Zadrozny, put me in your camp, girlfriend, because I don't either. We got enough to deal with here. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Coming up here on the show, one of Iran's most famous actresses has been arrested after supporting protesters. We've got the latest on the demonstrations there after the break. We're hearing today from activists who say the Iranian government has been hanging people in public to create fear and to try to stop the protests that have been happening over the last few months. One business owner from Tehran is telling NBC News they want to show the public that their actions will not go unpunished so that families stop sending their children from going out to protest. Just within the last couple of days, officials arrested one of the country's most famous actresses, Taraneh Ali-Dosti, according to state media. She starred in the Oscar-winning movie The Salesman. That's after she posted a photo of herself on Instagram without a hijab, with a sign reading "Woman, Life, Freedom." That's the big phrase that demonstrators have been using over the past few months. You saw some people holding that up at the World Cup, et cetera. Ali Arouzi is joining us now. Ali, talk to us here. What are the charges she's facing at this point?
Hey, Hallie. Well, she's facing charges of spreading false propaganda without any evidence. But these are obviously trumped-up charges that we've seen protesters face and other well-known figures in Iran. And as you mentioned, Hallie, it's very important to point out just how famous Taraneh Ali-Dosti is. She has 8 million followers on Instagram. She was in an Oscar-winning movie. She's easily recognizable anywhere in Iran. So they're sending a message out to the public as well that nobody is safe, no matter how famous you are or how well-known you are. You know, anybody that criticizes the regime could end up in prison or face a death sentence. But it's having a bit of an adverse effect. This is also making people scared, but it's also making them very angry in Iran, Hallie.
That anger keeps building and building because of moments like this, right? Because of those executions that we talked about. This fight between protesters and the government is also affecting money, the economy there, with Iranian currency falling to some of the lowest it's been in a very long time. This means more pressure for the regime, Ali, right? When it hits people's, not just their lives, but their pocketbooks, their livelihoods.
That's right, Hallie. It's hit everything across the board in Iran. Iran is a dystopia today. Nothing works properly. Everybody is on edge. And look, after 3 months of incredibly violent protests, a crackdown by the regime that's cost almost 500 lives, many of them women and children as young as 8 years old. They've arrested over 18,000 people, allegations of unspeakable human rights abuses on the streets and in the jail. All the regime has been able to do is fight itself into a stalemate and tank the economy. So we're seeing a bit of a lull right now in the protests, but the general expectation is that they are going to pick up again because the regime and the people are so polarized and there is no middle ground between them. And as you mentioned, the economy has just gone. The rial is now at its lowest levels it's ever been.
Ali Arouzi, thank you very much for that reporting and for staying on top of this for us. Let's get you over to the 5 things our team thinks you should know about tonight. Number 1, China is reporting 2 COVID-related deaths today. Why is this so significant? Because this is the first time that the country has reported deaths since the days before they lifted the zero COVID restrictions there. We expect to see a surge in cases in China in the coming months because of that. Number 2, more Americans are getting back home today after getting stuck in Peru. Deadly protests there left a lot of international travelers stranded at the historic city of Machu Picchu. Train lines were blocked, airports shut down. Some people had to actually walk to other towns to get out. The country's been in a state of emergency ever since the former president was thrown out of office earlier this month. Number 3, Amber Heard and Johnny Depp have settled their defamation lawsuits after that really high-profile trial over the summer. Both sides filed appeals after the jury awarded Depp $10 million in damages and Heard $2 million. In a statement to NBC News, Depp's attorneys say Heard is paying him $1 million as part of the settlement. Heard called the decision itself to settle very difficult. Number 4, the company behind Fortnite has agreed to a $500 million settlement with the Federal Trade Commission. The FTC says Epic Games broke child privacy laws by exposing kids to potentially dangerous content like sexual harassment and bullying. It also says the company tricked players of all ages, into making in-game purchases that they didn't actually want. As part of the settlement, Epic did not confirm or deny the allegations, but did agree to change privacy policies and how it charges users. Number 5, Australia recalling some baby spinach. Why? Because some people are like hallucinating or having visions or delirium or seeing blurriness. Health officials in one state say more than 160 people have reported symptoms. More than 40 of them had to get medical attention. Officials think the products were maybe contaminated with something unsafe, obviously. More on that front to come. Coming up, why Uber drivers in one big city are hitting the brakes on picking up passengers today. That's in the local. Plus, the World Cup, it is over, and the winners are on their way home after that epic match. But guess who's still in Doha? Megan Fitzgerald. She's hanging out to talk to us about what it's been like behind the scenes to cover it all. That's the backstory. Next. Time now to get the backstory, our behind-the-scenes look at how a story comes together and how it fits into our bigger picture. As we came on the air tonight, Argentina, they're on their way back home after they won a 3rd World Cup title. That's the thing. I mean, look at that shot. Look at Messi. Did people go bananas? They sure did. When Argentina beat France after penalty kick, not penalty kick. Is that what they call them? Penalty kicks? No, they call them something else. Bert, my director, is not telling me what it is. I don't know what it is. But shootouts. It was a shootout. Can you tell I don't watch soccer? Anyways, look at the moment it happened. They celebrated victory well into the night. Our Megan Fitzgerald, she has been on the ground in Doha, Qatar, for this event for weeks now, the world's biggest sporting event. There she is. And with the tournament now over, she talked with the U.S. ambassador to the UN about what comes next for the country after its treatment of gay people, women, migrant workers came under this global spotlight this whole tournament. Watch.
They've made some progress leading up to the World Cup, and we hope that they continue to make that progress moving forward.
Megan Fitzgerald joins us now. Megan, let's stipulate, I don't know anything about soccer. I'm just going to be honest with you here. What I do know about, right, is sort of the geopolitics of the global moment that this World Cup happened in. There was so much discussion leading up to and during the World Cup about human rights violations in Qatar, concerns about hosting the tournament there. People still showed up, obviously, from all over the world to watch this event. But I wonder, you know, and this is a segment, as you know, that we ask you to kind of tell us about what it's like to be a reporter doing the reporting. How did you do that, right? How was that balance for you as you were having the conversations like you had with the ambassador?
You know, it's such a great question, Hallie. I mean, as you said, this is a very unique tournament. It's the first one held in the Middle East, shrouded with controversy from the allegations of human rights violations. As you said, the fact that being openly gay here is illegal. You know, I mean, there's so many controversies. Then you saw what we saw on the pitch, where the players tried to have a voice. Many of the European players trying to stand in solidarity with marginalized people, wearing those One Love armbands. The Iranian players, you know, seemingly standing for the women of their nation, trying to fight for freedom and basic rights. There's so much that's a distraction off and on the pitch. But when you kind of just, you know, walk around Qatar, walk around Doha, and meet everyday Qataris, you know, you kind of get a different perspective on things. People here have been very welcoming, almost sort of going out of their way to make sure that you feel welcomed in their country. You sort of get that sense that they realize the perception of their country. And, you know, obviously there are those who don't think that gay people should be openly gay in this country. But when you do put that aside, in our experience here, the Qataris have been very welcoming to us. Hallie.
Let me ask you about, you know, this interview with the ambassador, because you asked her, what is the role that soccer plays in diplomacy? And she talked about it's a way for people to kind of come together, right? I mean, soccer is one of those sports that people call football in other parts of the world, but that, you know, that a lot of people understand and know, and it is something that is unifying. I bet you saw some of those moments. I mean, we're looking at some of the footage of our favorite, like, Megan on the street moments, where you're just, like, talking to fans going absolutely nuts. Did you have, like, a favorite few moments from this, Megan?
Yeah, you know what? When you take a look at that Iranian game, that's certainly a striking moment. When you put the politics aside, we know the tensions existing between the U.S. and Iran. You were just talking about what's happening inside that country with Hallie. But when you looked at that game, it was an opportunity to sort of just set that aside, and you really saw these players just playing the game and being just sportsmanship, athletes. When an Iranian player went down, you saw a U.S. player pick him up, and vice versa. At the end of the game, when the U.S. was victorious and you saw the Iranian players in tears, you saw the U.S. team consoling them. I mean, it was just this moment of humanity, and we had a chance to ask some of the players why they did that, and they said, look, we empathize with them, one, because of what they're going through in their country, but two, the fact that it doesn't feel good to lose a game. So that really stands out. And then also, just a personal moment, getting a coffee, for example, at a coffee house. There was a woman who wanted to buy the coffee for me, and I'm like, no, it's okay, don't worry, I'm happy to buy this coffee. And she said, no, you're in my country, welcome to Qatar, let me get this coffee for you. We've been taking up all kinds of tables outside of restaurants to do our live shots, to speak with people. The owner of that particular restaurant was trying to offer us food. We're taking up all these spaces at his restaurant, and he's trying to give us something. So again, we know what this country stands for in terms of, not welcoming the LGBTQ community. We saw Grant Wall wearing that rainbow T-shirt going inside the stadium, being stopped. But again, there's also the other side to it, and the people that we had interacted with here seemed very welcoming and really sort of wanting to give a different perspective of what their country is all about, Hallie.
Megan Fitzgerald, live for us there in Doha. What's the first thing you're going to do when you get back home, Megan?
Sleep.
Okay, I feel you on that. Good luck. Enjoy that long flight. Thank you so much, Megan. It's been great watching your coverage. Really appreciate you and your team and your crew. NBC News covers hundreds of stories every day, and because you couldn't possibly read or watch or listen to them all, our bureau teams have done it for you. This is what they tell us is going down in their regions in a segment we call The Local. Let's start out west, where the NTSB is investigating bad turbulence that hurt dozens of people on a Hawaiian Airlines flight this weekend. Look, you saw the oxygen mask drop. Look at some of the aftermath video. I guess they hit a patch of rough air about a half hour before they landed in Honolulu. The seatbelt sign was on, but 11 people still ended up in the hospital in serious condition. From our Southeast Bureau, police in Tennessee say a transportation worker found a human heart in a pile of salt. Officials say workers thought it was a rock at first, but something seemed off, so they called it the police. Testing proved it was an adult male heart. No other remains were found. Investigators are doing some DNA testing on it to try to figure out where this came from. From our Northeast Bureau, Uber drivers in New York City shut down the Brooklyn Bridge today. They're protesting because they were supposed to get a raise, but the company sued the drivers to stop it, and a judge pressed pause on that raise. There's supposed to be a hearing on this next month. When we come back, still no verdict in Harvey Weinstein's LA rape trial. What the jury has asked the court for so far, and what this timeline could mean for the disgraced mogul. Coming up. Some breaking news just into us on the so-called triple-demic of flu, COVID, and RSV. We're just now hearing from Walgreens that they're putting a limit on how much pain relief medicine for kids you can buy online because of low supply and a lot of demand. Walgreens telling NBC News that supplier problems are making it tough to get this over-the-counter fever medicine for kids, which means you can only buy 6 at a time online. We are out to CVS for comment as well, since they are reportedly limiting those purchases too. Let's talk about what's happening in Harvey Weinstein's LA rape trial. Jurors are back in the courtroom today, deliberating after taking Thursday and Friday off last week. They got to read back a little earlier, meaning like they asked a judge for some info. We don't know exactly what info. They are on their 10th, number 10 day of deliberations tonight. Still no verdict. The charges against Weinstein involve accusations from 4 women spanning from 2005 to 2013, which Weinstein had pleaded not guilty to. You'll remember he's already serving a 23-year sentence for a rape conviction in New York. Danny Savalos is joining us now. And Danny, as a layperson, I don't know how to interpret 10 days of deliberations and counting. How should we be thinking about this? Any tea leaves we can read from that timeline?
I actually have a lay observation about California criminal cases in general. They seem to take a long time, from O.J. to Elizabeth Holmes. They just drag on in a way that cases elsewhere don't. But from a jury analysis standpoint, in a sense, we're all engaging in astrology because we don't know what the jury talks about in that jury room when it's just them and nobody else. But they may be struggling with the different kinds of definitions of different sexual assaults. But I think generally it's a good sign for the prosecution that they've taken this long because it sounds like they may have already concluded on some of the counts and they're working their way through the other counts, albeit really slowly.
Yeah, because you look at the New York trial, it took 5 days. He was facing 5 charges. In this trial, you have more women accusing him. You have more charges. So presumably that could factor into some of this too, right?
Yes, it could. I mean, in the New York case, I believe the jury verdict form was a single page. Here in California, I think it's about 14 pages. And they have to work through that along with working through the jury instructions. It's a very paper-intensive process. Most jury deliberations don't take longer than 2, maybe 3 days, especially in cases that are not high profile. But for it to take this long, yes, it's unusual. But if nothing else, it's a sign that the jury is taking their job seriously. And again, if you were to be a betting person, and I'm not, you would conclude that the jury has found him guilty on at least some of these. But that's just pure conjecture. We have no idea what goes on in that room.
Danny Stavalos, thank you very much. We'll be watching that, of course, on Verdict Watch yet again tomorrow. Appreciate all of you. We're going to have more of you here tomorrow, same time, same place. I will see you after the Christmas holiday. Happy Hanukkah, Merry Christmas to those celebrating anything that you do this holiday season. Hope you're enjoying it with your family. See you next week.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.